Calling the meeting to order. I wanted to start off by welcoming our new commission member, Brian Solis, Chesapeake Deputy City Manager. I was going to say, I had the good fortune of working with Brian in collaboration with Inference Transit. It's always a pleasure. We're excited that you're still in 757 doing good stuff. I'm supposed to now, reading this bullet, to remind you when you would like to speak directly into your microphone after you make the little red light happen. So as we go through the meeting. But now I think we need to do a approval of the agenda. First of all, there is an announcement, request to modify the agenda to add the meeting minutes from the November commission meeting, which are distributed as a handout prior to the consent agenda. So with that, if there are no other changes, I'll entertain a motion to make that change.
So moved.
Thank you. It's been properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? Call for a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the agenda then passed. Move on to the public comment section. We received any submitted public comments in advance, and wanted to know if there are any public folks who signed up to speak today for public comment.
We have no one signed up. If anybody would like to address the commission, please come forward. Seeing none, back to you, Madam Chair.
Okay, well, I'm going to pass it right back at you for the executive director's report, Mr. Crum.
Thank you so much. So included in your agenda is my monthly activity report. I'd be happy to respond to any questions. There are a few items that I would like to highlight for you. First, last Friday, in this very room, Friday, February 11th, the Southside Network Authority, or Southside Broadband Authority, held a really important meeting. The 5 Southside cities, the city of Virginia Beach, the city of Norfolk, the city of Portsmouth, the city of Suffolk, and the city of Chesapeake, each committed to providing $5 million apiece to build and start construction on our Southside fiber ring. This fiber ring will interconnect with the subsea cables that have come ashore in Virginia Beach and provide an interconnected ring that's going to provide that ultra-fast broadband service among the 5 Southside cities. A contract was provided this week to a company that has bid on the construction. We hope to have that contract signed and returned within 2 weeks. And if all goes according to plan, towards the end of March, we're going to have a groundbreaking, Madam Chair, and celebrate the initiation of construction of this project. We hope to begin construction in May or June, so it's full steam ahead. In addition, we've had a good couple of months with broadband investment. We're really excited, and under the leadership of John Harbin. John, would you mind standing up real quick? Some of you elected officials in Isle of Wight County, in Southampton County, in Suffolk, you've worked with John Harbin. John wrote a grant for those localities through the BODI program, the Virginia Telecommunications Initiative, and received about $24 million of state grant money. It's going to be matched by about $11 million in local money, and it's going to build over 2,000 linear miles of fiber, last mile service within Isle of Wight, Western Suffolk, and Southampton County. That then is going to be able to hook up with all the work that we're doing. So for instance, Chesapeake, you're building your local network. It's going to tie into the fiber ring. Portsmouth, you've been doing that. You're going to tie into the ring. You're going to have the entire south side pretty interconnected. Within the next 4 years, that amounts to nearly $60 million of investment. Now we come to the peninsula, right? We're working with the with VDOT on ways to connect through the tunnels on the Merrimack and Perez Bridge Tunnel. And we're gonna be ready now to start the design and thinking about that ring on the peninsula, which is our next phase. So really, really excited. I just want to thank all the elected officials for part of that. So that's really great progress. So I wanted to mention that, Madam Chair. I also wanted to do a couple of introductions. Staff just loves this part. I know we released at the TPO meeting this morning. But we have a couple of new staff people. Jay Quill Tatum is our new accounting manager. Jay Quill, thank you. Really excited to add her to our finance team, working with Sheila Wilson and her team. It's been a great addition. And our new IT manager, Dimitri. Thank you, Dimitri Rector, who just started here just a couple of weeks ago. So great additions to our team. And while I'm at embarrassing staff, one more item to note. Ms. Kelly Arledge, would you mind standing real quick, please? So, really excited about this. I announced in my executive director's report, we've done a little bit of a reorganization. I'm really pleased to announce that Kelly has been promoted to be a deputy within our organization, a deputy executive director. She will be in charge of building maintenance. People will report to her. The operational aspects of this building and all the meetings that we put through here will report to her. IT will be under Kelly, the entire administration team. She serves as the liaison for our managed services contract. She manages our legal services contract with our attorney. Also is our human resources administrator, and also will be responsible for oversight for our city rights. So somebody advised me, make certain she says yes before you tell her. But we are really excited about that, and I think it's really going to be very helpful with our operations. So Kelly, congratulations. And Madam Chair, that's all I have to report today. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Do we have, first of all, congratulations, welcome aboard to Team HRPDC, TPO, and Kelly, thank you for your hard work, congratulations. Bob, do we have time now to talk about the chamber visit?
Yes, out in the lobby, Brian Stephen left some handouts about the chamber interregional visit this year. Ms. McClellan serves as the co-chair of this visit this year. We're going to Charlotte, North Carolina. It will be June 22 through June the 25th. The goal is to get as many local officials, local staff, city managers, county administrators to attend as possible to really go on an exploration mission to Charlotte. Understand what they do well. Honestly, though, the way these trips are structured is to understand what we do well too, and compare best practices and see what we can learn in terms of giving back here in this region. I think many of you know that Marcus Jones is the city manager in Charlotte. He will be part of this program. He's formerly in the city of Norfolk. He looks forward to welcoming everybody. Might even be an opportunity for a bit of a roundtable with some of the city managers and county administrators if you're able to go. So, Madam Chair, I'll just turn that back over to you if you have any additional comments.
Thank you, Mr. Croman. You all heard me talk about this previously. I would encourage you to think about this. So far, we've got some great folks lined up, elected officials. We've got a couple of mayors, chief administrative officers, council members, and we'd like to see more. We have room for about 75 folks. So if you are interested, please sign up soon. We're going to be talking about things that are important to this area, including transit, including airports, affordable housing, economic mobility, workforce development. How do we retain and attract the future workforce as well? So it's going to be a lot of fun, most importantly, so I hope to see you all there. Okay, we'll move on now to our Community Advisory Committee report. And Mr. Mark Gadulik-Piotrowski is now chair. And Mark, I'd love for you to say a few words.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I recently took the seat as chair replacing, to the best of my ability, Terry Danaher, who served there for a decade or so. And as I was telling my mayor, I'm no Terry Danaher, but I'll do the best I can. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mark. We'll move on now to the consent agenda. Everybody, Bob, you want to present anything related to that?
I'll just mention your consent agenda this month includes items such as the meeting minutes from January. As the chair mentioned, we're going to add in with the November meeting minutes, our public comments, or treasurer's report. We do have a budget amendment. We are asking for approval under item E for some grant contracts that allows us to regionally purchase some emergency management equipment for use by our localities. We would like to accept a grant from the Department of Environmental Quality related to the Chesapeake Bay Locality Implementation Program. We have an appointment to the Community Advisory Committee from the City of Suffolk, and also approval of our regional meeting schedule for the upcoming calendar year. Madam Chair, we would ask for a motion seconding action to approve that consent agenda.
I'll entertain a motion. Thank you, Dr. Ward, moved, and properly seconded by Dr. Mayor Glover. Thank you. Any discussion on this? Any of the items within? I will make take a moment. I did ask Mr. Crum as I was going through this about these emergency vehicles, wondering exactly where those emergency vehicles would go to and who would purchase them. And Bob, maybe we're going to bring this back at a later date, but could you quickly just explain that first?
Yes, you have a group of your emergency management staff, the urban area work group, that works with John Sadler, our emergency management coordinator. They get access to these federal grants. What this allows us to do is pool that regional money, federal money as a region. We do financial support as the fiscal agent. These vehicles are then purchased and they are available to use regionally for response to reported incidents and in preparation. Ms. McClellan mentioned to me that it might be good for us to plan sort of a 101 on regional emergency management. Even our metropolitan response team that we fund and staff as a region. So we'll arrange that for a future meeting. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. With that said, I'll go ahead and call for the vote. All in favor of the consent agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So passes. We'll move on to agenda item number 7, and let's talk about J-Loose and what that actually stands for. Bob, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so I think everybody knows you can't talk about J-Lease without our senior regional planner, Ben McFarland. So Ben's coming up to the podium, but this is a project that we're really proud of. Ben has been the project manager for a couple of joint land use studies in our region. Virginia Beach and Norfolk, when we call the study that we did on your behalf. This study, Ben is managing with the cities of Portsmouth and Chesapeake, and he is ready to present the summary presentation and recommendations from that study. We're also excited today, after Ben gives his briefing, to have Mr. Bruce Stark, the Director of Federal Facilities Support for the City of Hampton. The City of Hampton has done an excellent job of moving forward with implementation of some of their J-Loose activities, and we thought, as Ben discusses this today, this would be a great opportunity to hear what Hampton has done in terms of implementation. And then, of course, we have Admiral Craig Quigley with us from the Hampton Roads Military and Federal Facilities Office. So, Ben, I'm going to turn it over to you for the briefing.
Great, thank you, Bob. And just one minor correction, that the study is finished, so I've managed it. I'm no longer managing it, and after several years, it's nice to be able to say it's in the past tense. So, Madam Chair, members of the Commission, good afternoon. It's good to be here to talk to you about this project that was a long-term, large-scale effort with a number of stakeholders. Had the privilege to be the project manager for this, but certainly couldn't have done the work without our consultant team, but also with the localities and the Navy staff that were a part of this. Portsmouth and Chesapeake really went above and beyond with their public works and planning departments to be a part of this, to really contribute to the findings and the analysis that was done, and also our Navy partners as well. This is was a major endeavor. included work with several installations in Portsmouth and Chesapeake, so Norfolk Naval Shipyard, major part of this, Naval Medical Center Portsmouth, and the Craney Island Fuel Depot, in addition to the St. Julian's Creek Annex. That this study is really an opportunity for us to take a look at what some of the opportunities are for action for implementing practices, policies, next steps in terms of coming up with ideas for things that benefit both communities and the military installations to both enhance the operations and maintain the operations of those installations, but also to provide benefits to the communities that call those, that are home to those installations. And so this is, some of you may recall the joint land use study that we did with Norfolk and Virginia Beach for several installations on the Navy side in those two communities. This was a follow-up to that study, and really represents the culmination of a number of years of work with all the stakeholders involved. So just jump right in. Some little bit of background for those of you that have been in this room for a number of years or have been around the region for a number of years. This is not the first joint land use study that this region has done. This is actually, by my count, number 5 over the last 20 years or so. About 20 years, 15 to 20 years ago, major joint land use study was done on the south side for the Navy air installations, partially in response to the threat from Iraq. And following up on that, a study done for Langley Air Force Base on the peninsula, and then some additional work with Fort Eustis and Langley Air Force Base later, a few years ago. And then most recently with our Norfolk and Virginia Beach study, PDC was the manager for. A lot of work that's been going into all of these studies really represents the priority that localities here in Hampton Roads place on maintaining good relationships with our military partners, the importance that those installations have to our regional economy, that they have as employers of residents of our communities here in Hampton Roads. And this is really just the latest step in a long line of established collaboration and cooperation between localities and communities and military installations here in Hampton Roads. In particular, I want to emphasize that of late, the most recent studies have incorporated a lot of work on resilience, better understanding of the importance of dealing with flooding here, of sea level rise, of long-term impacts, but also that we are starting to understand that our installations rely on quite a bit of infrastructure that's located outside their fence line. I think whereas before the emphasis was really on encroachment issues, our understanding of how communities interact with installations is much broader now, and that's been taken into account in not just the 2 studies that the PDC has managed, but also in the studies that were conducted most recently on the peninsula as well. And I'll let Mr. Stewart talk about the work that's gone on the peninsula, but I really want to talk about what we were recently able to accomplish here in the Portsmouth Chesapeake joint land use study. So as a reminder, number of partners here, Chesapeake, Portsmouth, both cities involved here, Norfolk Naval Shipyard, Naval Medical Center Portsmouth, and Naval Station Norfolk. We had a consultant team led by AECOM that was instrumental in our role as the administrator and the project sponsor, dealing with the Office of Local Defense Community Cooperation, formerly known as the Office of Economic Adjustment. I think they wanted to just add syllables to their title. Big group, a lot of work that went into this project, and excited to be able to talk to you about some of the outcomes of that effort today. One of the lessons that I've taken away from these studies is that you think you have an idea of what the important issues are when you put together the application, and you really have just barely scratched the surface. And that's definitely the case here in Portsmouth. In Chesapeake, we had the opportunity, and really I wanted to emphasize at the beginning of this process that although we had a framework already set up when we had developed the grant application, that we wanted to be able to talk with our local stakeholders and our military stakeholders at the very beginning to make sure that, one, that we had a good grasp of what was going on, but also that we were prioritizing the issues in the way that they needed to be prioritized. And in this case, I identified 6 key issues to focus on through the study: parking, mobility, flooding on roads, access to installations, redevelopment opportunities, and then coordination and communication. And these issues we identified these and then used these to help frame some of our goals for the study. And I'm not going to read through all of these, but that these goals, we then were able to use these to identify potential options or opportunities for action, and then to inform our recommendations and our prioritization of what those actions might be. We'll emphasize that, as was with the Norfolk and Virginia Beach study and with the resiliency update in Hampton, that dealing with flooding impacts on the transportation network has become a key focus of these studies. And it's something that we are already working with our partners at the Transportation Planning Organization to see how we can factor the lessons learned and the analysis that we did of these studies into the work that's being done regionally when it comes to long-term transportation planning. So once we have those goals identified, we were able to develop with the localities, with the Navy, a set of actions in 6 different categories correspond directly to those key issues that we identified. Are 36 actions overall that were recommended for this project. What we did prioritize those. We were able to identify with our technical committee a number of evaluation criteria that were used to score these proposed actions. Want to emphasize that this does not mean that we want to do these in like ordinal fashions of 1, first, second, third, fourth. Mostly the idea behind using this evaluation is to identify what actions we think would actually have the highest benefit, but certainly implementation relies on more than just knowing which one's best to do first. You really need to be able to take into account what your capacity is, what level of funding you have, what level of coordination might need to take place. And certainly some of the the highest ranked priorities here are also happen to be some of the most expensive projects to take care of. And so doing those first may or may not make the most sense, but I think we have opportunities to begin the work on those projects that may take quite some time to complete. So we were able to categorize these projects, those 36 actions, into 4 different tiers. I'm going to highlight just a few projects from the recommendations from the tiers, first and second tiers here. In terms of tier 1 actions, these 4 corridors were identified by the project partners as being some of the most critical to providing access to the installations. There are also some of the ones that are most vulnerable to some degree of flooding, both in the present day and also more likely to be subject to flooding in the future. Effingham Street, George Washington Highway, Victory Boulevard, and Portsmouth Boulevard all provide that level of access that's critical to maintaining the operations of those Navy facilities in Portsmouth and Chesapeake, and getting a handle on not just what the extent of flooding will be for those roadways, but also what the potential options are for addressing that flooding, but also while promoting long-term sustainability and community development along those corridors as well, highly critical. And then when we look at the tier 2 actions that we recommended, some additional corridors left out there, and then some additional work that really dives into other aspects of transportation, whether it's parking, transit, looking into like helping the Navy better utilize its on-base parking, looking at bicycle routes, for instance. So a lot of different opportunities to look at the broader transportation network were identified. So we have at the top tier, we have the flooding emphasis, and then at the second tier, looking at things like, okay, how do we make the transportation system work better for a variety of different types of stakeholders? And then one other recommendation I'll just highlight here is this coordination on enhanced use lease opportunities. This is a program the Department of Defense has to basically let non-DoD stakeholders lease property that's not being utilized very highly, or as excess property. They don't necessarily want to sell it off, but they want to let people lease it for a commercial endeavor. So some exciting possibilities there when it comes to economic development for both Chesapeake and Portsmouth in these installations. We also looked at policies. Not going to talk about these too much, but I do want to emphasize looking at ways to better exchange information. This continues to be a challenge for a number of projects, all that we've been a part of, that our localities have been a part of, coming up with better ways to maintain those lines of communication. Is, I think, something that would bear a lot of benefit for our region and for each individual locality, as well as working with the military. I want to highlight the GIS data sharing, that really, when that works well, it bears a lot of benefit for both sides of the fence. In addition, this idea of incorporating these resilience guidelines or updating our standards to better reflect future conditions, that's something that we are working on with our resilience committee. I think I might have the opportunity to come back and talk to you about that sometime later in the year. But certainly it's not just something that we're concerned about in the context of the military. It's something that we're concerned about for everything we do here in Hampton Roads. One thing I want to highlight is that we throughout this process, we started off before the pandemic, and then ended up having to kind of change course quite substantially in response to the limitations on meetings. We took advantage of that. We tried to kind of steer into the skid a little bit and looked at some options for how to better engage with the public. And as a result, we developed this virtual room, which is still live. We'll say that those capital letters and POCHJ are critical. You go to lowercase, it won't work. But this was an exciting opportunity for us to test out some new technologies and to see kind of how we could better engage with the public. Had a lot of good outcomes from that. Excuse me. And then, just to wrap up in terms of implementation, there are a lot of opportunities here. Bruce is going to talk a little bit about how Hampton is taking advantage of those opportunities. We have implementation grants that once you complete a study, you're eligible for. Several communities here in Hampton Roads have already applied for DCIP or Defense Community Infrastructure Program grants. Others at the federal level, the state level, Community Flood Preparedness Fund. While it's here, I think a few of our localities have already applied and received grants that directly relate to some of the recommendations from these studies. Also have the long-term master plan work that's going on underway. And then at the local level, working with your capital improvement programs. A number of localities are incorporating these recommendations into those CIPs, and then additional work, excuse me, through our local efforts and also regional coordination. So when it comes to next steps, right now we're in the process of briefing all the project partners, and then we are waiting on final approval of the deliverables from OLD, excuse me, OLDCC. And coffee, please. Pardon me. So we continue to coordinate with our partners here and working on steps to ways to move forward. And that concludes my remarks, and I'd be happy to try to answer any questions you may have physically or mentally. Thank you very much. And then we'll also have Mr. Stewart coming up here, and I think I have time for a couple questions. Maybe not the voice at the time.
Ben, you mentioned or had a link up there for the virtual community engagement room. Is that possible to send out to customers to check it out?
Absolutely.
See some of the use for other purposes. That's great. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Mr. Keaton, and then go to Mr. Bethel.
Yeah, maybe not be able to answer this, but this might be a more recent development, but the Central community has been talking to the Navy about redeveloping the Wheelabrator site and continue to be able to lease the operations center there that Simpson had. Was that facility on the radar? That, like I said, that might be a more recent development than what the study entailed.
Thanks for the easy question, Mr. Keaton. Yes, that was something that
Get back to you.
we did discuss that developments with the Wheelabrator plant during this project. Staring right at Mr. Baldwin over there reporting right now, because I know he was a part of these discussions as well. And we didn't have, that wasn't incorporated into the analysis that we did, but we did identify the need for ongoing coordination and looking at different opportunities for kind of how the Navy's priorities for energy use may or may not differ from our regional priorities for waste management and energy. And I think the recommendation we came up with in the study was we should talk about this some more, and we should have everyone get together. And we crafted that in such a way that I think, in terms of implementation grants, I think that would be an excellent opportunity for the city or for the region to look at, to get some additional funding, look at some analysis, bring in some consultants to help kind of craft some of those ideas. But we didn't really get into the weeds too much on that.
Ms. Ritter?
Thank you. I'll keep this really brief. Looks like a big thing to accomplish, but when you reference the joint land use study for Oceana, Ventress, and Chambers, that looked that way too, and I think it's been a tremendous success. I would say of the three cities, Virginia Beach had the most work and investment that they had to make. And probably we were second and Milford was third. But it was a real success. It was a great partnership. Admiral Quigley's organization is a result of that joint land use study. It did not exist prior to that. The state took an active role and so did our congressmen, our General Assembly delegation. So what looks like to be big may or may not be. And Mayor Glover, well, you know, we worked out, and it would be something to research, the funds to purchase either additional development rights or fee simple properties from the state. There's a complicated payback there, but there's also the partnership. We have a partnership with the Navy to continue to fund part of that. So I think if you look back to what that group did, I think maybe Lewis or Ms. Henley would remember, it went pretty quickly, but really, I guess, to be honest, gotta be honest, we all worked really hard, but what saved us was Jacksonville not wanting the operations back. So, you know, in all disclosure, they voted no, and by that time, we were well on its way. But having the J-List underway was one of the two reasons that the REC not shut down, did not vote to shut down the Ocean Adventures and Chambers. So it's a real success story. And I think, you know, the PDC facilitated that, so I feel like y'all can do a great job accomplishing all of these things.
Thank you, Ms. Ritter, and I did want to acknowledge Mr. Baldwin for your help. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just want to thank Bob Crum and all the HRPDC staff. Everyone has been mentioned. I won't go through it. There's a lot of people involved in the study. Haven't been involved in this thing from the very inception of the idea of doing it. Certainly did not end up where we were thinking in the beginning. Much more than that, and we're very pleased with the way it's turned out.
Thank you. And I think, Ms. Ritter, you bring up, it's really important to think about the historical perspective of that previous JLU study and what it garnered us. And as we think about this study, the North Virginia Beach study that was done recently, we need to use these as leverage tools and as talking points when we're talking to the state and our federal partners for our flooding needs and our funding, and of course other things as well. But these are just really valuable studies that should not sit on the shelf, but should be put into action. And maybe it would be helpful to have a sort of an annual update as to where we are in our goals for each one of those studies. So it's not just a study, but it's a study we're checking in and we're measuring our progress. Yes, ma'am.
The state required, when they bought into the legislation, the state required annual meetings, and I think it's biannual reports we still do on the update of any property purchases or development rights purchases. So if there's going to be state legislation affiliated with this, that was an excellent vehicle to keep the localities working together. Because we have to go to Oceana.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, Ben, why don't you turn it over to your friend?
Okay, well, good afternoon, and thank you all for having me here. Thanks, Bob, for inviting me and clearing it with my boss and the mayor's here today, so hopefully we'll be straight up and keep us on track, and you'll report back that we did okay. And Jason, good to see you as well. Thank you. First start, I've got federal facilities in my portfolio in the city of Hampton, which includes joint base Langley uses, specifically Langley Air Force Base, NASA Langley Research Center, the Hampton VA Veterans Affairs Medical Center, and National Monument at Fort Monroe. So all those federal facilities fall under my purview. But today specifically, I'm going to talk to you about our actions and implementation with respect to the two joint land use studies. Ben did an outstanding job of kind of giving you what a JLUS is in terms of what they go through in the studies and kind of the things they tee up for follow-on recommendations, for example. And so what I'll do is really focus more on what we did with our 2010 JLUS and what we are doing now with our 2018 JLUS, and then just give you some takeaways that I think are important for what you're, when you look at the implementation portion of it. So the 2010 Joint Land Use Study has been kind of mentioned, really at that time was focused on non-compatible land use encroachment in and around the airfield at Langley Air Force Base. And we had just, on the heels of the Virginia Beach, J-Lease, we recognized that we needed to be proactive in getting the J-Lease under our belt so we could get at working the non-compatible land use. So since 2010, we've been aggressively pursuing acquisition of properties that were in the flight approach zone. You can see up there we have spent a significant amount of money investing in acquiring those properties to put them into the public domain. We have moved forward now, and Ben mentioned REPI funding. So once we started with the state, obviously matching funding down the path of acquiring properties, we were able to go after Defense Department REPI dollars with Langley Air Force Base as our wingman. And so they have now been partnered with us to acquire additional properties. So we continue to work this program. There's properties that are underway that we're trying to acquire to actually mitigate the non-compatible issues there. So that's been a very positive thing. State funding, city funding, and now Air Force funding. I like to tell folks that if we buy a property for $1, the state puts 25 cents in, the city puts 25 cents in, and the Department of Defense under REPI puts 50 cents in. So it's a good program, and we're continuing to pursue that activity. As we move forward, we recognized after a lot of different conversations in the region relative to resiliency, soil rise, climate change, that we needed to also address resiliency. So we amended the 2010 joint land use study with a consultant that was already part of the Resilient Hampton team, Wagner and Ball out of New Orleans. And they're a consultant that helped us put this project together. So again, amending the 2010 to really do a serious look at what we could bring from inside the installation, outside the fence line, to focus on resiliency and adaptation. So to date, we have had several projects underway. Some of them are completed, but some of these derive directly from that 2018 joint land use study, looking at relocating the west gate, Langley Air Force Base, outside the clear zone. Right now, it's in a very highly probable place where accidents would occur. So there's work underway. We've completed that study. We're doing a due diligence study. And I'll kind of get into a little bit more, but suffice it to say, these are all recommendations from the two joint land use studies, specifically in this case, the 2018 amended J-Lease on resiliency and adaptation. And so we've garnered a significant amount of funding from Old CC and our city in terms of matching. So we always like to use, I tell folks, other people's money, which we're doing in this case, to get these projects implemented and underway. So the gate relocation project, again, is trying to take the gate from inside the clear zone, which is really the most probable place of an accident, and relocate it. And the preferred location that came out of the study is up here near NASA Langley Research Center on Community Boulevard. That'll be a great asset for us to have because the base is growing significantly with the F-22 mission. They've got further plans underway that grow a campus up there for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. So the gate access on that side is going to be a great move forward. We're right now conducting the due diligence, the environmental stormwater study, to look at the footprint of this new gate. This is generally what the new footprint would look like for access into the installation. But today we're out in the field looking at what that footprint from wetlands and stormwater management is going to do from an impact of that particular footprint. So that's a project that's underway. That's an implementation recommendation coming from the J-Lease. The other project that we got as a recommendation from the J-Lease is critical access. So Langley Air Force Base has three principal gates: King Street Gate, LaSalle Gate, and then the West Gate that I just mentioned. So the LaSalle Gate kind of goes along this corridor here of LaSalle from Mercury Boulevard into their visitor center and access to the gate. So the study today is looking at flood mitigation opportunities. We may even raise the corridor because we know that corridor is critical to getting those folks to the base for military purposes for conducting their operations. So it may include, like I said, floodgates and the like as we get down through the details. We briefed our council on this, and they know what we're up against. And good thing here with all these projects, Langley Air Force Base, again, is shoulder to shoulder with us. And Ben mentioned going after additional funding. So we'll be certainly looking at the Defense Access Road funding, for example, DSIP funding, which we did have a DSIP grant a couple of years ago. And the last project that's in the oven, if you will, on its way to Old CC for grant approval, hopefully, to implement this project is a look at the big Bethel Reservoir. That was, in my words, a gift from the Army when Fort Monroe was proactive and closed to the Air Force. The Air Force really isn't in the business of maintaining the reservoir. There's 2 dams out there, so we're doing the highest and best use of what that dam, I should say, what that reservoir could do for the community. The surrounding communities of York County, Poquoson, Newport News, not so much as Poquoson, but Newport News, York County, and Hampton have interest in this particular reservoir. What can we do to make it a viable option for all sorts of things resiliency? So that study, like I said, is in the cookbook and moving its way towards the Old CC. So some of the key takeaways I would just tell you all that I've felt during this project or these projects has been the commitment in support of our city council, the resources and the staff participation that they have garnered to put behind these projects, these studies. That's huge. That really gets you to the level you need to be to implement and go forward on these. Advocacy and partnership from the installation is critical. Each one of these projects, the commander of the installation has been right there with us, pen and pencil, putting his team to task to help us get these projects underway. And obviously they talk about their future requirements, their future planning, and that helps us understand what we can do as a community from outside the installation, inside the installation to help move the needle, because we all, I tell folks we're at 3.9 billion reasons, and that's the economic impact from JBLE Langley. There's that many reasons we want to keep Langley happy and keep working with them. The collaboration with Old CC is Ben mentioned, that's important. I've had Jay Sweat as my partner at Old CC for 14 years now, and having a good relationship with Old CC and understanding what you're working on and giving them insights, and that's where we get other people's money. So that's a good thing to have, that partnership. And lastly, the engagement and the advice from key stakeholders, whether it's our partners in York County, Poquoson, Newport News, all those stakeholders that come to the table that understand that this is a community in interest and inputs from them is huge. So we appreciate that. Subject matter experts from VDOT, for example, have been on our team, Dominion Energy, you name it, they've been at the table. So I think from my perspective, the takeaways, and I know folks are doing that on a daily basis, but this is what's really been our success story and how we've been able to get the implementation of a lot of these projects underway. So happy to answer any questions, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, Mr. Sturp. Great presentation, very interesting and relevant about all of our communities. Any other additional questions or comments? As we've heard the terrible term BRAC mentioned a couple of times here. And while I wasn't in office at the time, I did live here and I recognize it really lit a fire under this region. And we made it understatement. And while we might not be facing BRAC in the future for the reasons we faced it previously, I suspect we'll be looking at BRAC in the future as it relates to flooding and resilience. And so I think these studies are really, really critical. And I really appreciate your comments, Mr. Ritter, because it sort of jolted me to realize that we can't just let this be a study. We've got to get on these things. And as much as we do go into the state and federal government, these now provide vehicles for us to do that. Mr. Crummon, do you have some ideas on how we might, as a regional entity, help to ensure that this goes forward?
Well, a couple of items. First, Mr. Starr, thank you for the information and the success that Hampton's had. I think if we can start using that as a model, so to speak, and move forward in some other localities, it could be tremendously impactful. Admiral Quigley, I come to the HRPDC meetings and I'm often reminded that if we would lose any of the bases that we talk about in any of these localities, as Ms. Ritter pointed out, right? Economic impact, it's the fabric of our region, our community. All 17 of us would suffer from that collectively as a regional community. The good news is that when you get done with your joint land use study, there are some monies you can get at, and they're not quite as competitive as other funding sources. Would that be fair to say, Mr. Stern? So Ben has a lot of information and ideas. There's implementation grants through the federal government that we can use to start moving the needle on joint land use studies. So what we think is there might be an opportunity to set a table. And I suggested to Ms. McClellan, maybe to get started, it's a subcommittee of this commission, working with Admiral Quigley, working with Admiral Rock, who Admiral Quigley and I were in a meeting, and Admiral Rock is out of town, couldn't be here today. He is committed. He is all in and working with us on how we move implementation on these JLEAS recommendations. So Ms. McClellan, it might be an opportunity for this commission to lead. Maybe we're not leading, we're just convening the right people. And we can start setting a framework for communication and how we develop, start picking these implementation steps and trying to start moving the needle on them. Ben has the pathway to that money, right? We can get at the implementation money, but we sort of need an organized process. So one approach could be that this commission could appoint a subcommittee. Eventually it's got to get to your staff. And maybe it starts with a couple of people here from the impacted, the host localities, and maybe we could come up with a real implementation plan, how we resource this and move it forward.
Any comments, thoughts, ideas? Yes, no?
I think it's a good idea.
I think it's a great idea personally. What would be the process for such a subcommittee to form?
So if the chair and the commission would concur, I think myself and our staff team could get together, come back to you with a proposal at next month's meeting, so that we can put that in writing to you. It starts with policy leadership, and then the day-to-day, the week, the month is gonna have to drill down to your technical staff experts, right? And those with the military, which fortunately we have great partners with the military that can help us with that. So if you would be interested in that, we can come back to you with that.
I think that would be great, and it seems to me that the subcommittee that we created on coastal resilience could basically, I think, dissolve that and move our efforts instead into this JLEAS where there's a lot of overlap and compatibility. Looking at my vice chair, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, we'll talk about that at the next meeting. And thank you for the great presentations. Appreciate it. Thank you, Adam, for being here as well.
If I could say something?
Yes, ma'am, I did see you down there.
A committee, another committee to be formed, in relation to exactly what that committee is accomplish. It's just useful. It's not useful.
So, understood, so we'll maybe get the recommendation from staff to have some very clear directives, if not.
That'll come to us before we decide whether or not to.
Yes, ma'am, yep, that'll be
Yeah,
next.
that's fine. Yeah, that's fine.
Good point. Okay, speaking about water, now let's work, let's go from tidal flooding to stormwater. So stormwater local assistance fund projects, also fondly called SLAF. Bob, could you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'd like to introduce the commission Ms. Jill Sunderland, who is our Senior Water Resources Manager. Jill's going to talk with you today about the Stormwater Local Assistance Fund. As your regional support staff, we always want to be monitoring funding availability, funding sources to address your challenges and your opportunities. Obviously, we've talked a lot about flooding and the impact it's having in our region. The SLAF program is a fund that's been created by the Commonwealth of Virginia, and Jill's done some research to put together for you an overview of that fund, how it's being used at the state level, and how we're doing as a metropolitan region, so we can assess if we're really taking advantage of this opportunity. So Jill, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Bob, and thank you, Madam Chair and Commission members for having me this afternoon. So I will be talking about the Stormwater Local Assistance Fund, which we do call the SLAF Fund. And this is a Virginia grant program that is focused on water quality improvements. So instead of having that flooding focus, we're looking at Chesapeake Bay-driven water quality improvements. Because the Community Flood Preparedness Fund has gotten so much attention throughout the state and in our region over the last year, I thought it would be helpful to first highlight the differences between these two programs and what's similar about them. So the CFPF is designed to reduce impacts of flooding, and you can submit a project or a study to get that money. But for SLAF, it really is focused on water quality improvement, and it is designed to be stormwater projects in the ground. You could do planning, design, or implementation, and all of those aspects could be included in your application. The Slav Fund was started back in 2013 by the General Assembly, and we've had 7 rounds of the fund so far. Comparatively, the CFPF, we just had 2 rounds of that so far. Both of these programs do require a local match, where the CFPF requires a range somewhere between 10% and 50%, and it depends on the type of application. But for the SLAF program, it requires a 50% match from the locality. It's interesting to note that while both planning districts and localities can apply for CFPF, only localities are eligible for the SLAF Fund. I mentioned before that we have had 7 rounds already of the SLAF program. And what's interesting here is that SLAF is funded directly through the state budget, while we know that CFPF, at least currently, is funded through the REGI program. Something also to note is that the SLAF program is administered by the Department of Environmental Quality, while the CFPF is administered by the Department of Conservation and Recreation. So, what types of projects are typically funded through the SLAF program? These are the 3 most popular projects that are installed. Stormwater best management practices, stormwater practices are focused on 2 things. 1, to slow down the flow of stormwater runoff, and 2, to filter out pollutants. These are the 3 most commonly funded practices: stream restoration, wet pond retrofits, and constructed wetlands. Now, these are not the only types of projects you can get funded through SLAF, but they really are the most popular. So now I'm going to look at the program as a whole. We've had 7 rounds so far, and as you can see, the amount appropriated each year has varied. This past year, we had $34 million given out as awards, but back in FY16, there was a lower amount, only $8.5 million. But the important thing to see here is that it's really consistent, and we've had funds appropriated 7 of the last 8 years. You'll notice there is no line for FY18 because they didn't appropriate money that year. The average award has been a little over $500,000 per project, and there's been a total of 289 projects awarded for a grand total of $144 million. So first, I'm going to look at how we compared as a region to other regions across the state in terms of the number of projects that have been awarded. You can see here that we've done well. This is a success story for sure. Our region has gotten 88 projects funded, and that's been 30% of the total. We're right there neck and neck with Northern Virginia, and our friends in Richmond have gotten 14%, while everybody outside of those 3 regions have gotten 26% of the projects. It is a little different though when you look at the dollars awarded. You can see that our region has gotten $28 million of the pot, which is a significant amount of money, but it's not quite as much as Northern Virginia, and you can see that they actually have more than double the amount of dollars for pretty much the same number of projects. So that's kind of interesting, and the reason for that is because the SLAV program is designed based on your cost effectiveness at removing phosphorus. And what the Northern Virginia localities are able to do, and it's important to note that our localities on the peninsula can also do this, is they do stream restoration projects. Stream restoration from Northern Virginia, they're doing 2,000, 3,000 linear feet of restoration. And these projects are so big and they're removing so many pounds of phosphorus that they really are getting those big dollar amounts. But it's important to see here that our localities are also getting money through this fund. So drilling down to our region by locality, 12 of our localities have gotten money through the fund and been awarded projects. It's interesting, you might wonder why only 12, and that's because all of these localities, at least at one point had or currently have a stormwater permit. And in that permit, there are requirements to reduce pollutant loads. So it's a real driver to apply for the SLAF dollars. You can see here that James City County is leading the way with the most number of projects awarded, but so many of our localities are getting a piece of this pie. You can see Norfolk's up there, Newport News, Isle of Wight, York County, and really just throughout the region, for a total of 88 projects. When we look at the dollars, you can see which localities are getting the most dollars. Not surprisingly, it is our friends on the peninsula, with James City County, Newport News, York County, and the reason is because they too are doing those stream restoration projects, which are so highly favored in the SLAF program. But it's important to note, and I want you to see, that the south side localities are also getting money through this program. They're just doing different types of projects because we simply don't have the types of streams and the topography that creates those streams here on the south side. But you can see here, I mean, Chesapeake, Norfolk, Portsmouth, we are getting Virginia Beach. I mean, we're doing constructed wetland projects. We're doing wet pond retrofits. And those have been really popular. I mean, outfall repairs, bioretention, green streets in Portsmouth. I mean, and just recently, Norfolk got 2 different living shoreline projects funded. So this really is accessible to throughout the region, and we've gotten $28 million so far. So a few takeaways here. I just wanted to share that as a region, we have a success rate through this program of 59%. It's important to note that I know we have such a big focus on our resiliency projects and our flood mitigation projects, but something to consider is that when we're doing those large-scale resiliency projects, there could be a piece of that that would be appropriate as a SLAF fund or a SLAF application. So definitely consider that when you're figuring out how to fund these projects. In years past, the SLAF may be familiar to you because we have included it in our legislative priorities over several different years. I made this point earlier, but the SLAF funding really has been stable and reliable, having gotten funds 7 of the last 8 years. So I wanted to look and see, are we really leaving any SLAF money on the table year over year? So if you look at this, in the blue line is the appropriations, and in the gray line are the amount of money awarded. And you can see for the most part, the localities across the state really are taking advantage of this program, with $144 million distributed out of the $160 million that have been appropriated. So what's next for the SLAF program? Well, before Governor Northam left office, he did include $100 million proposed in the 2022-2024 state budget. Now, while I would be surprised if the level of funding stays at that same place, it is really encouraging that there is still a line item in the state budget for this program. There is a round scheduled already for this year that's going to be released in August, and the applications will be due October 1st. Another thing that's promising for our region is that DEQ is currently revising the guidelines to prioritize applications from localities experiencing high levels or above average levels of fiscal stress. And as you can see from this map here, that represents the localities that are in yellow, and also the ones that are in red would have an advantage through the SLAF program moving forward. So you'll see that's several of our localities. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Jill, great presentation. So we went from water quantity to water quality. But I do think it's important to note that before the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, the SLAF funds were truly the only state funding mechanism for anything to do with water, if there are dual purpose projects with water quantity as well. So it's really, really important. And it's important that this continues to stay in this budget. So any questions for Jill? Did everybody know what SLAF meant before this presentation? Now you do. So you can go home and impress your family. Jill, that was really a great presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Do you have any other comments?
Well, Jill, do you, is there any advice you could give to localities about how to best position projects to be most competitive and, just based on your observations? If there were 1 or 2 tips you might offer localities to think about?
Well, I think one aspect of it is to really look carefully at that cost effectiveness in terms of how much does it cost to remove 1 pound of phosphorus, because that really is the currency for Slav. It's interesting because the program will cover planning, design, and implementation. It might be advantageous to just look at your implementation or only the design and not the planning, or to kind of piecemeal it that way so that you can get that cost effectiveness lower. Another reason, in the past that some applications haven't been awarded is because they have been, like, if that locality had gotten money in previous rounds, but those projects were delayed for whatever reason, they hadn't gone off the ground, DEQ is really hesitant to then offer more. So it's one of those things where make sure the money that you've gotten so far, those projects are underway, and then your projects would be more favored in the program.
I think, if I may, Madam Chair, yeah, I think those are great points, Jill. Jill, could you go back to the slide that showed the distribution of the money by region? I think that was a really interesting slide. Yeah, perfect. So what I'll just bring up is, and even if you could go back to the previous one, Jill, where you have, yes, exactly, thank you. So on money side, we're bringing in about 28% of the funding, right? And on the project side, we're up about 30%.
Right.
As Jill mentioned, this has been part of our regional legislative program. It's something that we might want to think about as a commission really doubling down on as we lean into next year. There aren't many funding programs that come out of the state general fund that we're actually bringing in about, we could think about setting the goal of bringing in over 1/3 of it to our region, right? And so it's just something to think about. We're being pretty successful here by sharpening our pencil and our strategy. We can do better. This seems like a place that could be really impactful for any of the staff. Just a quick observation.
Agreed. Thanks, Bob. Yes, sir. John.
Yeah, I'd just like to suggest that maybe one of the reasons that we don't see as much coming in, I'm sorry. One of the reasons.
When it's red, it's on.
Yeah.
When it's red, it's on. Yes.
Yeah, okay. One of the reasons that we may not be drawing as much down may relate to the fiscal stress issue. And this does require a 50% local match. So it might be that while my first priority would be to increase the funding available through SLAP because of the benefits that we're receiving from it, another consideration might be to suggest that it includes some kind of sliding scale relative to the fiscal condition of the locality.
And that's exactly what they're looking at revising this year. So it will make a difference in the next round, the fiscal stress.
Great point. Any other comments? Thank you, Jill.
Thank you.
Okay, speaking of Friends in Richmond, the next item is a General Assembly update. Mr. Crum, would you lead that discussion?
So I'll start this off and then open it up for our chair to join me with some additional comments. So obviously we're past crossover. It's been a pretty hectic couple of weeks for legislative liaisons up in Richmond. We continue to monitor the progress of the bills that relate to our regional legislative agenda. We have staff at many meetings that we either monitor subcommittee meetings or even present testimony when needed. We continue to hold weekly calls of your legislative liaison at the locality level. Ms. McClellan participates in those, which is really impressive that we get 12, 15, 17 of them a week, even with the incredible schedule they're holding these days as they represent our region up in Richmond. Bills of interest in specific areas. Obviously, bills that impact transportation funding is something we've been watching incredibly closely. We had a couple of bills that would have put a pause on our regional gas tax. It's being used by HRTAC to fund our regional transportation priority projects. A couple of those are still alive, but we're feeling pretty good about how those are positioning themselves and some of the opposition that we've been able together for those. We had a couple of bills that would have removed funding from transit for HRT. I talked about that at the MPO meeting today. Feel pretty good that those have been placed on the table, and we should be in good shape of retaining some of that funding. One area that I'm going to ask Ms. McClellan to talk about a little bit relates to resiliency. One of the legislative priorities of this commission was a request that the Commonwealth of Virginia form a Commonwealth Flood Board. Our goals with that request were a couple of goals. Number one was we were looking for, first off, a continuation of placing a priority of resiliency within the Commonwealth of Virginia. We just finalized the Virginia Coastal Master Plan, the first phase. We feel like a lot of momentum has been created. We are really looking for a structure to continue to move that forward so it transcends administrations. Secondly, we were looking for some type of a framework that pulled together the various state agencies who are involved with the resiliency issue, the flooding issue, and promoted coordination and alignment among those organizations. We don't have that right now at the state level. Where we have a Commonwealth Transportation Board for all the state agencies involved with transportation to come together, there's really no structure right now that brings together conservation and natural resources, Department of Housing and Community Development, Virginia Department of Emergency Management, VDOT, Department of Commerce, and other state agencies to get collaborative alignment around these resiliency goals. So we were looking for a structure that could do that, and we were looking for a structure to provide accountability and oversight and strategic investment of any money that might flow to our Commonwealth from the federal government for flood prevention, flood mitigation issues. So, Ms. McClellan, obviously we've been following about 3 to 5 bills through the process. Do you want to just provide a little bit of an update of where you think we stand on that?
Sure. First of all, I would say I've never heard the General Assembly in my years of watching it talk about flooding as much as they have. So that's the good news. And it didn't matter what party label you had or what part of the state in which you hailed. So lots of good bills being passed both the House and the Senate, including codifying the Coastal Resilience Master Plan and making that a statewide plan, including codifying the Technical Assistance Committee. Making sure, those are 2 big ones there, creating a revolving fund for the Commonwealth to draw down Storm Act funds that are going to come through a new FEMA revolving fund. So those are very good things. Our friend Delegate Cliff Hayes from Chesapeake carried our bill for a Commonwealth Flood Board, and we're very, very appreciative for him for that. It was a roller coaster of a ride watching this legislation go through. The administration had a coastal authority bill that they were creating that only applied to the coast. We were looking at things, even though we are coast, we said it needed to be statewide. The administration revived that bill. It was carried by Senator Higgins and Delegate Bloxham. The Higgins bill ultimately did not pass the Senate. The Bloxham bill did pass out of the House. It mirrors in many ways the things that we were looking for, but there were some flaws in the bill. There were some conflicts with some other pieces of legislation. The conservation community had some concerns. And so right now, after crossover having just happened this week, it's our expectation, Delegate Bloxham is in agreement, working with the conservation community, that bill will likely come to the Senate for a vote on the floor with an amendment for a study. And the study would take into consideration all of the departments that Bob referenced, a regional perspective, and a lot more stakeholders. And that we'd be back at the table with a more solid bill next year. So not exactly what we wanted as an outcome, but not a bad outcome, to be honest with you. So that's what I would say as it relates to those bills.
As Ms. McClellan said, I will also add that in addition to the study that will come out of the Bloxham bill, as mentioned, Delegate Boulevard from Northern Virginia does have the bill to create the Resilient Virginia Revolving Loan Fund. That is crossed over. That fund would provide loans and grants to local governments for flooding and resiliency matters. So we think that that's a positive step. And then as Ms. McClellan indicated, Delegate Boulevard has another bill, HB 516, that would encourage the implementation of recommendations from the Virginia Coastal Master Plan. It would require that plan to be updated, revisited by this year again, for another look at that by December 31 of this year. It does require the preparation of a statewide flood protection master plan. So for the first time, flood prevention would be looked at statewide. And as you mentioned, this from the technical advisory committee. So I just want to pause a second and thank our chair, Ms. McClellan. She has put in an incredible amount of hours working this for us at the General Assembly. Maybe not as far as we were hoping for, but I do think we're making progress. So Ms. McClellan, I'll send that back over to you.
Thank you, Bob. You're probably gonna move on to this anyway, but I'm gonna steal a little bit of your thunder. We did, as mentioned, lobby on the transit bills, and we feel like we have been able to hold harmless or to keep from getting clawed back, I should say, a dedicated regional transit funding. However, I do want to point out to you all the grocery tax bill cut. It looks like, as you all probably already know, the Senate passed a bill that would implement a 1.5 cent cut. The House was the full 2.5 cent cut. The Senate version held harmless the localities for 1 penny, but that other 1.5 pennies, one goes to education and the other 0.5 penny goes to transportation. I believe they're trying to find money for the education piece, but what worries me is that transportation piece, there will be no funding for it. And that's about $186 million a year to transportation funding, which would relate as where my HRT had about $1 million a year to HRT. So I'm concerned about where that's going to go. I think the train has left the station, no pun intended, but it is it's going to be challenging to all of our localities for sure.
No, I think we'll just pause there and see if there's, I know many of you, particularly the city managers and county administrators are following items. Maybe we can just open it up if there's any questions or comments or additional information anybody would like to share.
And I would just say that your legislative liaisons are a really strong group. And they're working together wonderfully. I've been up at the General Assembly, I've been on Zooms with them, and they are working together really in such a collaborative way. It's a real testament to the regionalism that exists. So thank you.
If I could say that, I know I said that at a board meeting here, but you don't see that in other parts of Virginia or other places. I'd just like to reinforce that. Mr. Price and I have worked in other regions. That they are together with me every week, but they're doing this daily. And they're talking about if one locality needs help, other localities are assisting them. They really are working hard with it. It's our regional agenda, so I really just want to compliment them on that. They are excellent.
Mr. Quick, Admiral Quigley.
Thank you. While we're on the subject of General Assembly action, I just wanted to throw one more out there. Going back to Ben McFarland and Bruce Sturck's presentations from earlier, they both mentioned the Defense Community Infrastructure Program, or DCIP. That's a federal program. There is, we are looking good at a proposal at the state level now for a companion program. It's modest. It's only $10 million over the biennium, but it was passed out of the House and Senate unanimously. So we'll see what the funding level is when the budget comes out. But the trend line is looking good, and that would be another pot of money that communities could access for actual infrastructure projects, such as you would find coming out of J-Luce. So that's a piece of good news.
Thank you, Admiral. It's also a bipartisan bill. I think it's Delegate Tata from Virginia Beach and Senator Sproul from Chesapeake carried that. So it's a really great bill. I appreciate you highlighting.
If I may, Madam Chair, I also wanted to say that I know a priority of this entire region for some time has been completion of this 29-mile I-64 gap. So a couple of things. First, we have in the budget $20 million for planning and design for that gap. So that's a start. But we also continue, and as recently as last night, to stress the need as they think about allocation and priorities of statewide funding, bringing up the issue that 29-mile gap is critical to our region, critical to our military, critical to our port. We also have now, and the CAOs, we've been talking about this for a while, how do we move action on a piece of highway that's outside of our region, right? Really happy that the Richmond, Hampton Roads neighbor region, our friends in Richmond have leaned on that as a priority for the neighbor region as well. So they're starting to express and advocate for that as well. So, you know, even as you think of our tourism industry, obviously, we really feel that that's an important item for us. So we'll continue, we're keeping that in front of them. 20 million there for planning and design. To give you an idea, the construction in total is about $700 million. The remaining 9 miles in our region would be about $195 million. So I'll give you an idea of what we're doing. So just wanted to mention that.
See no other comment, we'll move on to the 3-month tentative schedule. Our next meeting is scheduled for March 17th. I know you'll be counting the days. And then from there, advisory committee meeting minutes, those are included in your packet, as well as some additional information provided by the chair. Mr. Chair, can I move on to item number 13, old and new business? Is there any old business to discuss? Any new business? Okay, with that, we'll see you on March 17th. This meeting is adjourned.
Yes, sir.